Innovate to Zero, making sustainability an opportunity to reduce carbon and cost. Really looking forward to hearing more from today's speakers on this fascinating and crucial subject. This is one of the great challenges of the times we live in. The good news is that there are some really significant business opportunities from the sustainability revolution. But before we kick off, I want to give you a bit of background on Bionow. So, because not everybody here is familiar with us, but just to give you a bit of background on us, what it is. So Bionow is a not-for-profit business membership organisation that supplies services and support to the life science sector, primarily across Northern England, but increasingly beyond. There's about 330 members of Bionow, and they include PDM. Member benefits include accessing, like conferences, networking events, the Bionow Awards, all of which are open to everybody, members and non-members alike. The conferences cover subject areas of interest to the Bionow members. So they're subject areas like neuroscience, oncology, the North East Life Sciences Cluster, raising investment, pharma manufacturing, Yorkshire Bio partnering, antimicrobial resistance and precision medicine. And the members can also receive significant savings on everything from lab consumables to business insurance, R&D tax credits and more. Everything that like a small SME business needs really to help boost their competitiveness and save them thousands of pounds every year, which we do for many of the Bionow members. So if anyone wants to find out more, please get in touch with me. I'm on LinkedIn. My email address is also on the Bionow website. Well, that's enough about us. So without further ado, just go through some housekeeping. This webinar has been recorded. PDM have some information that they'll share with the delegates afterwards. The recording will be available as well. So if you want to get in touch with them afterwards as well, to review it again with colleagues maybe. And we're going to keep questions until the end. So please put your questions in the chat. And then PDM's CEO, Richard Hall, will pick them up at the end and we'll go through, the speakers. Okay, so first up today, I'd like to introduce Michelle Sullivan. Michelle is the head of public affairs for the UK and Ireland at Boston Scientific. And also Michelle chairs sustainability at ABHI. So with respect to both organisations and roles, I'm really looking forward to hearing Michelle's perspective and insights into the importance of sustainability in this sector and how things are moving forward. So Michelle, if you want to turn your camera and microphone on, over to you.
Thanks very much, David. Good morning, everybody. It's really nice to be here. This is my favourite topic to talk about. One of the things I always start with is I tell everybody that 3.5 years ago, I didn't know anything about this topic. And in fact, somebody from NHS supply chain came to me and said, Michelle, what's Boston Scientific doing about environmental sustainability? And I said, oh, I've no idea. Let me go and find out. And therein started my journey to be what I call an accidental eco-warrior. And, I've done a few courses. I talk to everybody. I'm interested and engaged, and I've built up a knowledge base as a result of that. And as David said, I'm also the chair of the Association of British Health Tech Industries Sustainability Group. And we all work together as industry members to try and work out how we're going to approach this difficult topic and the ways in which we should be collaborating and considering the topic. Something else that I always start my talks with is that there's a couple of concepts that we really need to understand to get our heads around to think about how we as businesses need to operate in this world. The first one is a little quote, which I'm allowed to say because I am a health economist by background. And that quote is that anyone who thinks you can have infinite growth in a finite environment is either a madman or an economist. So we need to start thinking about how we're going to operate in a more circular fashion. And that's the other concept that I always introduce just so that everybody's on the same page, which is that we're used to doing things that are linear. And our linear economy takes things out of the ground and makes things from them and uses them, and then it throws them away. And obviously in a finite environment, that's not very sensible because eventually it's all going to run out. And at the same time, it's also damaging our environment. And so we're trying to move to a more circular economy. And some of the initiatives that you see from such organisations as the NHS where they are the world's first health system to commit to net zero, are to do with the fact that the health system is responsible for 5% of all the world's global emissions. The fact that the health system is a hugely wasteful setup in some instances for very good reason. You know, single-use devices were created to prevent infection and make sure that they're predictable in how they work, and all of those good things ensure quality. So circular means, you know, we've got to reuse, reduce, recycle, all of these different concepts that aren't necessarily inbuilt into our business world. So what does that mean for us now? Well, the topic of this whole webinar is to do with the fact that environmental sustainability doesn't mean more cost. And someone else that I work with in the NHS has a brilliant saying, which is that if you think environmental sustainability is going to cost you more, you're doing it wrong. And I suppose what you're going to hear from people today is some ways to think about how you can reduce your emissions, reduce the waste, become more lean, become more efficient, start to think through your green spectacles and hearing aids about the way to operate in the world that the health system is now asking you to behave, to reduce your emissions in your supply chain. If you're in someone's supply chain, they're going to start asking you to reduce your emissions. You need to know where your emissions are coming from before you can do that. And you need to start thinking about how to make sure that there is an infinite supply of some of the things that we take for granted right now to do with supply chain resilience, because all the precious metals that we use, all of the different components that are part of our medical devices, these are finite resources that we can't just throw away. Otherwise, eventually they're going to run out, and we'll also be competing with other industries for them too. And we might not be the most enormous of those industries or have the loudest lobbyists. So we really need to start taking this seriously and think about how we're going to go forward. So to which end, thanks for your attendance, and any questions at the end, I'll be delighted to answer. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Michelle. That was fantastic. Really, really great scene setting there. Some really good quotes as well, and figures. I love that quote about the infinite growth in a finite environment, and you know, it really does sort of set it out really well in terms of, you know, what we need to be thinking, not just in this sector but overall. So remember, everybody, please put questions in the chat. I know Richard's just put a message in there a minute or so ago. Next up, I would like to introduce Rich Shaw. So Rich is the sustainability lead at PDM. PDM are a Bionow member, and I'm really pleased to be supporting them today. The company has deep expertise with design, and Rich is going to provide insights and practical guidance around carbon reduction plans, how good design can be critical with this, and ways to reduce your costs and ultimately carbon. So over to you, Rich, if you can please step onto that virtual stage.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Dave. I'm just going to pull up some slides just to help me run through this. Hopefully that will now have worked and I'm not overlapping too much of it. There we go. I've gone for the weatherman look this morning. Well, good morning, everyone. Great to have you with us. So as Dave introduced, I'm Rich Shaw. I'm the commercial and sustainability lead at PDM. We're a design and innovation consultancy based in Thirsk, where our studio is, and also we work out of Platform in Leeds. My background, so I'm actually a product designer, but I've got an increasing experience and a huge passion for sustainability. It's really been a focus of my career over the last couple of years. And with PDM, we've been really focusing on what we've called our Innovate Zero. So this is all about using innovation as the mechanism to drive forward with our sustainability goals and ultimately reach that net zero. Outside of PDM, I'm also very involved with a number of organisations. So the NIHR, or we at PDM, have officially partnered with them to support them and new startups looking to embed sustainability into their product developments. DHSC have established a Design for Life programme, which I've been contributing to for the product design aspects. The ABHI Sustainability Working Group, and also a BSI group working on remanufacture of medical devices. So I think for a lot of people who end up working in sustainability, there was a trigger point. And for me, it was when I was working in the outdoor industry in New Zealand. It was an organisation which had sustainability running right through it. It was really at the core of the company. And we were operating in a B2C space, so business to consumer. And we had the likes of Patagonia alongside us as a competitor. When you've got somebody who's really an international kind of pin-up for sustainability, you have to respond. And this organisation had done that. And actually, they were the first B Corp in the Southern Hemisphere. And that was achieved whilst I was working there. So it was really celebrated. And there I saw some incredible materials coming through to the market. Things such as Bloom and algae-derived EVA foam replacement being used to make things like Croc sandals, or Reprieve, which was recycled plastic bottles, which were kind of ocean plastics retrieved from the sea and made into polyester fabrics and clothing. So really incredible innovations. Alongside that, I was in the bike industry for a number of years. And again, as an industry, they're rapidly catching up. And if you want to go and check out a really good sustainability report, have a look at what Trek have done. They've actually carbon footprinted their highest volume bikes to get an understanding of what's contributing, the footprint of them. Really good understanding, and very similar to the kind of work we're doing. One of the biggest takeaways from kind of this bit of my background was the collaboration is key. It's something where if we're all being kind of closed and competitive in that mindset, it's going to be a lot harder for us to move forward. And what the NHS have done is really kind of forced the entire industry to move. So we actually need to collaborate like never before. Or if you like, we can go further, faster together. So I know a lot of the Bionow members aren't necessarily directly suppliers to the NHS, but you're probably in the kind of tertiary, secondary, upper tiers. So these might not hit you immediately, but your customers may well be asking you for these so they can conduct their carbon accounting. So at the moment, we're in the 23-24 bracket where organisations are required to have a carbon reduction plan in place. Currently, that's including a subset of 5 categories of scope 3, which I'll come on to in a moment, what exactly that is. By 2027, they're actually looking for all scope 1, 2 and 3 categories to be accounted for. And actually in 2028, we've got this product carbon footprinting coming onto the radar. So there's going to be at the procurement level a mechanism to get an understanding of what the carbon footprint is of the product. Alongside this, what we've actually seen is things starting to creep. So within framework questions, we're seeing questions on packaging and how much of that is recycling at the moment, how much will be recycling by the end of the contract. Beyond that, we've seen questions around reducing single-use plastics, reducing emissions in the supply chain, usage of products, disposal of product. All of these questions are actually creeping in and around those major milestones. So it's really worth being on the front foot and being aware that the agenda is quickly ramping up, and it's really important to be in a position to answer and have a plan for some of these questions. Scotland are also pushing ahead with this, and they have got product and product design in their lens. So looking at how are you considering environmental considerations in product development, manufacturing, how are you mitigating environmental impacts in sourcing and distribution, how are you incorporating it into your design process. So it's really a focus at the moment. So it's great to be kind of addressing this topic head on. In terms of scope 1, 2 and 3, just very quickly, scope 1 are the direct emissions, so things you are essentially it's combustion happening on site in your premises. So you can think of this as things you are burning on site. Scope 2, that relates to energy that's being produced on your behalf, or if you like, you're buying it in. So the electricity that you're buying in, if it's from a national grid mix, will certainly have a carbon footprint attached to it. Outside of that is Scope 3, and that's broken down into the upstream and downstream elements, and it essentially encompasses everything else that your company might be producing in terms of emissions. So obvious things we can relate to, such as business travel, transportation, distribution, those kind of activities happening upstream of product, and then things downstream, like the downstream transportation or end of life use of sold products. Could be the energy that your products use and service. So that's a quick run through on Scope 1, 2, and 3, and that'll help explain the next slides. So we've been conducting the CRP for a few organisations now, with more still in the works. And what a carbon reduction plan is you start off by doing the carbon accounting piece, and this is establishing your baseline where you are now. So in doing that, you need to account for the carbon using an established method generated by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. So that's the recognised standard for calculating emissions. And at the moment, the NHS are asking for Scope 1 and 2 and 5 categories of Scope 3. So if you are manufacturing medical devices, your pie chart will probably look something like this. If we are to add in the remaining 10 Scope 3 categories, so we look at all 15, your pie chart probably looks a bit more like that. So if you're to address Scope 1 and 2, which a lot of organisations are targeting first because it's most directly in your control, you're actually only addressing this relatively small slither of the pie and leaves a heck of a lot on the table. And it's very tempting to, because Scope 3 is the hardest one to address. But that's not a reason to kind of put the head in the sand and ignore it, because the sooner we can get stuck into it, the better. So how do these Scope 3 emissions break down? What we've been tending to see is the majority is coming from purchased goods and services. So if you think of things like plastic pellet for injection molding, there's a huge petrochemical process behind developing and refining that polymer. So that accounts for an awful lot if you are manufacturing goods. Outside of that, transportation can be a big one, particularly if there's a lot of air shipments in your supply chain. This can be quite significant. And then it's things like employee commuting that can add up, as well as waste in operations and end-of-life treatments. So all in all, the takeaway from this slide really is that purchased goods and services tends to be the majority of emissions. In going through this process of carbon accounting in general, what you'll come to understand is that for every invoice you're paying as a company, there is a carbon cost associated to it. So when you start to directly tie your costs, your expenses to carbon impacts, you'll start to see that if we can reduce the costs, we can reduce the carbon at the same time. So that's what Innovate to Zero is all about. In terms of the need to act on this sooner rather than later, if we're to plot this emissions as of today or 2023 and a linear trajectory to a net zero of 2045, a lot of organisations are looking to be net zero in Scope 1 and 2 by 2030. That seems to be a common goal that a lot of organisations are picking, which is great, but it's actually going to leave us quite a long way short of where we should be if we were following a linear path to net zero. So really, you're going to have a lot more work to do in the remaining 15 years, causing for a lot more of an abrupt change to how a business is operating to achieve that. So really, this is just to drive home the importance of acting now, particularly with Scope 3, is to start building a plan around it. You might be asking, why is a design agency talking about sustainability? It's actually, turns out it's very important. So research by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is kind of the leading UK think tank organisation, if you like, on circular economy. Their research found that about 80% of a product's environmental impact is determined at the design stage. So as designers, or during the design stage, you're actually making a whole host of decisions which have lasting implications for what's going to happen to that product, the environmental impacts from the materials you're choosing to how end of life is going to be managed. So in our process, we'll look to always support clients through the decision-making process and kind of lay out the options which are available to them. We've got established tools and methods that we're able to utilize to help facilitate that process. But we're not doing this in an academic way. We understand the need to be commercial at all times, and so we're very pragmatic in how we approach this. Ultimately, we're tying carbon reductions to cost reductions. That's our ultimate goal. And how we do this is really using circular design, or in essence, trying to achieve a circular economy where we can. So I'll move on to that in the next slide and explain a little bit more about what the circular economy is. You may have come across this diagram before. It's a great way, I think, to illustrate the circular economy. It's called the value hill, and in a linear economy, we're essentially starting off on the left-hand side, extracting raw materials from the earth and turning those into suitable feedstocks for producing components. So the components being our jigsaw puzzle, they're then assembled into components are assembled into products, and at that point we've reached the maximum value for that product. In the case of single-use devices in particular, that loss in value is almost immediate. They might be used literally for minutes, and then they're off into a yellow bag and away for incineration. So what the circular economy looks to do is to maintain that value, that maximum value, for as long as possible. And we do that through strategies such as repair and remanufacture. We can also look to refurbish product, kind of taking things down, stripping things out and rebuilding them. If we can't refurbish them anymore, we might look to recover materials. And at the very last step, if we can't do any of the above, we should at least be looking to recycle those materials used in the construction. So moving on into Innovate to Zero, what does this process look like for us? So we typically move on from a carbon reduction plan, take those learnings, those baseline data, and then start to break it down into where are those emissions coming from, which of your products might be the biggest contributors to that. And we do that through an innovation scrum, which is in like a workshop format, where we're trying to get as many stakeholders in the room. So as I mentioned before, sustainability really relies on collaboration, and we need to work with all different business units to achieve this. So we need finance in there, we need supply chain, we need production, and we need design. So we pull that together and really start to map out what are the prioritizations, what are the opportunities we could look at. Once we've established which products are really is the main focus, we then go away and do a baselining exercise where we look at carbon footprint and circularities. From those, we can move into a sort of circular product assessment phase. So we do hotspotting exercise to get a deeper understanding of specifically where within that product are the problematic areas. And that helps feed into the design and development phase. Again, we compare that with materials research, user and patient insight to help develop a new version of that product. And then lastly, we will repeat the baselining exercise. So we'll get an understanding of what the improvements we've achieved. So with the Innovate to Zero workshops, we can typically break this down into kind of two key areas. We'll be looking at the design and innovation aspects, but also those within the supply chain. So if we start off with design and innovation, it's often a great opportunity to re-engage and build some clinical insight or user insight. How is that product being used? Has that changed over the years? Is that product well suited with the other products it might be interacting with? Has the kind of care pathway changed in any way that this product could be better suited? The care pathway itself has a carbon cost. So if we can reduce the number of hours of surgery or reduce the number of hospital visits, we can reduce carbon that way as well. We can look to sustainable materials. There are lots of exciting materials coming to market. We have to always be mindful of the regulations around what materials we can use, but it's well worth considering as there are sustainable alternatives which are certified for medical device use. We can use classic design tricks such as lightweighting, so the approach to strip out weight wherever we can from a product and optimize it. If we can reduce weight, we reduce material, and then in doing so we can reduce cost at the same time. Modularity is also a great tactic, so if we can simplify and make a modular variation of our internals in particular, or the housings, we can use that across a number of products within a portfolio. Another way to help reduce carbon costs, spare parts, warranties, all of that stuff. Packaging is a really tempting one to go and look at to begin with. Again, there's lots of exciting materials coming through which are far more sustainable than their predecessors, and also opportunities to reduce the number of packaging items. A lot of things are overpackaged, so optimizing that is also an easy start and often incurs far less regulatory implications. On the supply chain side, looking to optimize space is an obvious one, but through space for shipping and also warehousing, that can often relate to the product itself. So looking to miniaturize or tessellate the packaging so that it's more efficient for transportation. Making things easier to sterilize. If things have to go through multiple rounds of sterilization because of how they're packaged or how they're set out, we can actually reduce carbon that way as well. Transportation, as I mentioned, we need to avoid using air freight wherever possible. So if we're manufacturing offshore, then certainly look to use sea freight where we can. There's a whole host of advanced manufacturing and automation processes coming through, which actually can reduce a heck of a lot of labour out of our manufacturing phases and make things more efficient to produce, and saving time, cost and carbon. And lastly, that sweet spot is probably that linear to circular shift, and that really helps to bridge the gap between what we see in the supply chain and what we can achieve through the design and innovation phases. So I've got a quick case study. I might have to fire through this because I'm conscious that we do leave enough time for Q&A at the end. So this was a device used in primary care. We started off with the first phase of baselining. So we started off with the carbon footprint, and we did that by breaking the product down into its components and looking at what material they're made from, what weight of material have we got there, how's that component being manufactured, what was the method, where was it being manufactured, and how was it shipped to the assembly site. And we break that down into a number of aspects, which is really helpful to help us understand where's the hotspot within the footprint. So in this instance, we can see the materials made up the vast majority. There was a good amount of packaging and a little bit of transportation bottled in there as well. So really that pointed towards trying to reduce the materials or switch to more sustainable materials where we can. This kind of data is far more accurate than the kind of spend-based scope 3 data that you might start off with when you do a product carbon footprint. So this is really breaking it down into the individual components and gives you far more detailed understanding. And that's great for building out things like your carbon reduction plan or in an ESG report. We also look at the circularity index, and this is all about how well optimized is this product for a circular economy. So we map the existing model. In this case, the product was being used in a linear manner. And in the image there, you can just see on the left-hand side, we had around 85% of the material was actually coming from virgin feedstocks, but there was a small recycled content, around 15%, which was a surprise, but that was kind of the nature of some of the materials we were using. And then kind of going through the linear pathway, we have 100% of components being manufactured, produced into products, and then sold to end customers. We can also then at this point start to model and understand what things like a refurbished approach might look like, and I'll explain more of that in a second. This is a great tool because it allows us to look at the product in terms of material weights, but also in terms of monetary values. So we can assign a monetary value to all of the materials used within the product. So we look at this in terms of cost savings as well as the material savings. The next phase is where we move on to the circular product assessments. This is a bit of a deeper dive into how well optimized is this product for circularity. Depending on the product, we'll often start with a controlled disassembly. So we record this on video and capture notes just to understand what end of life might look like for this product. How might we achieve or extract those useful materials or components within it? We kind of map out the product architecture, which helps us understand how the sub-assemblies nest within each other. And that's really crucial because that helps us pick out if there are products that need regular service or maintenance or more likely to fail or wear out. They need to be readily accessible, and that isn't always how products have been designed. We map all of that information into a hotspotting tool, which helps us understand where we should be focusing within each of the components that make up the product. And then we move all of that information on into the design and development phase. So in this particular case, we were looking at the access to the electronics. So service and repair was a key aspect for this device. And insight from technicians who were going in and doing calibration works, getting into those electronics could be made a lot easier for them. That would minimize their time on site and mean they could visit more customers in a day. That also helped tie into an ease of disassembly, supporting a smoother end of life or more end of life options. Modularity of the internals, so we were focused on compatibility with other products in the portfolio. And clinical insight surprised us on this. There were some unnecessary features. So just by removing those, we were able to save some component costs, save some tooling costs, and save some assembly time. So that was kind of a triple win. Lightweighting as well. There was a lot of over-engineered in some of the components. We were able to strip out some weight. And lastly, in the materials and supply chain. So by onshoring some of the large bulky injection moldings, it meant that we could reduce the shipping volumes and open up an opportunity to use the recycled material, in this case for a housing. And that in itself had around an 86% saving on carbon footprint. So huge savings there. When we kind of repeat that baselining exercise and we look at our improved metrics, we had a near 26% reduction in the carbon footprint, which is a great achievement. And really that was without going too deep into the product. We have a 75% reduction in virgin material. So you get an understanding of the weight contribution coming from the kind of virgin ABS that was being used. Outside of that, we'd optimized it for service and repair and therefore the disassembly aspects, which in turn supports a product as a service model. So this is the idea of the product isn't actually sold, but rather leased or paid for on a subscription model, which is kind of an opportunity to generate a new and more stable revenue stream. As we kind of see increasingly today, lots of subscription models becoming really dominant. As I mentioned, we reduced the shipping volume significantly by around 50%, and then opened up this door for a potential refurbished product range and therefore a wider market. These are some anecdotal savings we've been looking at through some other projects. Stainless steel instruments, this was around 40% saving just through lightweighting and onshore. An injection molded piece of capital equipment, that was around a 44% saving. Just to give you a flavour of, you can get some really significant savings, particularly if you're currently producing product offshore. Almost at 25 minutes, so I'll wrap this up now. This was really the last slide, but this was to highlight an interesting overlap between frugal innovation and carbon savings. So this was a project which we worked on with Leeds University, and this device, it replaces CO2 gas used in keyhole surgery by mechanically lifting the abdomen. And what we actually found was that by using limited materials, making this easy to autoclave, minimizing the weight, and within the clinical kind of procedure itself, removing the need for CO2, Leeds Teaching Hospital found that by using this approach or this device in 50% of emergency appendectomy surgeries, they were able to save £80,000 in procurement costs, the bulk of that coming from the CO2 that's no longer needed. and over 100 tons of carbon. So it's really an interesting sweet spot, which is kind of starting to get a bit more attention, is this overlap between frugal innovation and carbon saving. So that wraps it up for me. Do get in touch if you'd like to find out more about what we're doing. Really, my key takeaway for a lot of the sessions that I speak at is those products designed today will be those we account for tomorrow. So whatever you've got on the drawing board today, you really need to be thinking of it in terms of sustainability and carbon savings. Thank you very much. Sorry, I've run a wee bit over, but I'll hand back to you, Dave.
Brilliant, thanks, Rich, and no problem at all. That was fascinating. Really brought it home, the opportunity of what can be achieved. Really enjoyed the case studies. Next up, moving along, we've got. I'd like to welcome Graeme Cameron to the virtual stage. Graeme, if you can please join us up here. Graeme is the CEO of Pennine Healthcare, and Graeme is going to talk about and explain how he and his leadership team are making sustainability a pillar of their business and the benefits that this is bringing. So over to you, Graeme.
Thanks, Dave, and obviously thanks for the invite to kind of speak to. Great presentation from Rich there. I'm not sure if you've slightly scared me, but there's clearly a lot of hope in what you guys are doing. I think for the next 10 minutes or so, I'll just talk about our experiences as an SME. So we are an SME business. We're a manufacturer of medical devices. We're based in Derby. And we have 150,000 square foot in the centre of the country, and we employ about 200 people. The majority of my colleagues are operational staff, so they are working in our manufacturing space. Now, I think it was a pretty scary experience when I joined in 2021, because we just come out of COVID. We're obviously still having the experiences of Brexit, and then we're going through the MDR, which is the medical device regulation process, which was very, very challenging for us as a business. So it was a concern. And then we're hearing more and more about the demands of net zero from our customers and from the NHS. I remember actually Michelle, who obviously kicked off today's session, she said at a conference that net zero is going to be the next MDR. And if you'd gone through MDR, which we had, as I said, you would understand how that really hit us pretty hard. Our huge part of our business is selling to the NHS, but also we have commercial partners as well, where we contract manufacture medical devices, but also package as well medical devices for our partners. What was interesting is there was really stringent demands from the NHS in order to meet their requirements, but also our commercial partners were demanding that we supported them and worked with them and collaborated with them on their net zero plans as well. And then next to that, our colleagues, especially our younger colleagues, were expecting us also to put net zero, sustainability, focus on the environment at the very heart of what we did as an organisation. And we're an SME, and I am the vice chair of the NHS England SME Advisory Board, and we talk a lot about this as well, and the real challenge for SMEs in meeting the requirements of our customers. And there's a few big things that really concerned me. I think number one was our knowledge as a business. I remember a colleague was talking to some of his team down in operations, and he was talking to them about net zero and what do they understand of the requirements, and none of them knew anything. And that is a real worry where you don't have that deep knowledge in your organisation. Data was another key concern. We didn't have the data. We could not really understand where our carbon came from and where our big net zero challenges were. So again, that was a real worry for an SME, and also resource as well. My PA, Jen, who's fantastic, Jen manages our tenders with NHS. She also was managing our process of building data and understanding our net zero impact as well. So again, we don't have the same resources that large organisations have when you're trying to obviously take on this challenge. So it was pretty scary, really trying to understand how we even broach this subject, let alone meet the demands of our customers. And what we really wanted to do, and it chimes with me what Michelle said, she talked about it should not cost, and it can't cost us as a SME because you can't afford it, because we don't have those same deep pockets that other organisations have. But what we wanted to really do was make this part of our culture. We're very purpose-led. We did a lot of work around what our purpose should be, and that came really around protecting life. And we started to think, okay, we protect life. How can we extend that to, say, protect our planet, which is one of our programs? I wanted to build this within the purpose of our organizations and really enlighten our colleagues, but also recruit in the future based on our absolute focus and putting net zero at the core of what we do. We wanted to make it also a competitive advantage as well. We wanted to get ahead of the curve so that we could really drive this is one of our key cornerstone habits as an organization in terms of driving net zero and trying to say to our customers, use us, buy from us because we're really living the values that you expect of us. But finally, we wanted to really think, how can we become a more profitable organisation as a consequence of being a more sustainable organisation? And there's a few ways that we really started to think about that. And I think then we start to think as a leadership team, if we're putting this at the heart of what we do, what do we actually do practically as a business? Very much, I think, the starting point for us. And we started to think about a programme that we called the EEE programme. And that was, first of all, to educate our colleagues. So we're educating our colleagues in team talks, in our monthly briefings about net zero and about being a real net zero organisation. We're obviously providing the practical things that many organisations do. Green vouchers we created for walking, cycling or car sharing to work, free EV charging at work for anybody, litter picking days as well to make that impact on our community. We start to think secondly about eradicating. So, for example, fitting solar panels, which we're in the process of doing, thinking about how we invest, which we've now done in waterless urinals to save, I think at that point we calculated to save 800,000 litres of water per annum. How do we harvest rain? How do we become a paper-free business? And finally, we're thinking how to become more efficient. And this is about bringing waste out of the business. And as part of that programme, we actually stripped out about £300,000 worth of waste out of our business. We did some work later on where we found out that at the weekends we had the equivalent, even when we were not open, had the equivalent of 1,000 kettles boiling in terms of energy consumption during the weekends. So how could we really reduce this and become a more efficient and ultimately a more profitable organisation? But I think for me, one of the big challenges was the data. We just did not have this data as an SME. And that's quite scary because you're hearing what Rich just talked about then, and you're hearing that we don't have that capability. So we obviously then commissioned PDM actually to do a CRP project for us. And we did scope 1 and we did scope 2 and it was, now we're going to be moving towards scope 3. But it was really sort of helpful for us because we were provided with a pretty comprehensive report. I think it was a 37-page report about all the data in terms of our different scope levels. And that was really, really useful. Interestingly, it was only about 6%, I think, were scope 1, 2 and 3. So the next step is really to start thinking about scope 3. It's really to start thinking about our supply chain and how we can work with our partners to become a lot more efficient. So it has been a challenge. As I say, I think lack of knowledge, lack of data, lack of resource has probably been the big significant challenge for a small business. Luckily, we've found an organisation that we can work with to help us, support us, and to produce pretty robust data. And I think our experience is very much that there's no silver bullet in our journey. There's lots of activities we have to do. You have to put data, I think, at the core, really understanding where your carbon comes from, but really start collaborating with your customers, collaborating with your suppliers, and really trying to build at the very core of your organisation, becoming a net zero organisation. And that can really help you drive your profitability by removing waste, which we did. Build that culture so we can really start thinking about how we can get future talent joining our business who see what we do and want to be part of that journey. And finally, as I said at the beginning, just make it a real competitive advantage, try to outperform what our competitors are currently doing. So it's been a real journey for us. We're very much at the start of it, but I think my only tips to the call is really drive it as a core part of your organisation and work with partners like PDM who can obviously support you in making the journey a lot easier. So thanks, Dave. I think that's all I was going to say, and obviously happy to take any questions.
Brilliant. Thanks, Graeme. Really interesting. Really interesting. Great to sort of hear about how you've turned this into an opportunity, and it's working in your favour as a competitive advantage now with the culture shift that you've had in the business and focusing right across all areas of activity. That's really impressive. Over to you, Richard. I bet there's been a few questions come through over the last half an hour or so.
Yeah, so we've got 10 minutes of Q&A. Thanks for your questions. We'll go through these in order. If you've got any burning questions, please put them in now, because this is your chance to ask all of our speakers any subject to do with sustainability or net zero. I'll start off with the first one, which was about MHRA. This is a top-down approach. MHRA should be the ones promoting such recyclable products. It's a long way and expensive process from changing product packaging, and MHRA has never been friendly when it comes to novel packaging. I think I'll bring Michelle into this, but our observations on this is the MHRA are definitely on this journey. They've got something through their regulatory roadmap, so you'll identify that they are making a change. I think some organisations are perhaps quicker than others, but there is a general movement that all organisations are mobilising towards this. I'll just ask you, Michelle, if you've got any other.
Yeah, I mean, it's really a good point. It's important that this is bottom up and top down, and that we're all working together to that common aim. And as we've also discussed during this whole webinar, everyone's at a different stage of understanding and education and realising the reality of it. So we're going to see all of this pivoting as probably faster than you might expect, and also maybe linked to the obviousness of the emergency, if you like. The more and more climate change starts impacting the reality of being able to do business in an efficient manner, the more these things will move up the agenda. And the other thing that I always like to think about is that everybody's job's a climate job. So everybody's got a responsibility to try and improve the situation. And so whilst we can think they need to do this, we also need to think, whilst they're sorting that out, which takes time, what can we be doing that is possible at the moment? And you've heard some examples of all of those things from Rich's talk and from what Graeme just said as well. Practical things where you realise, oh, hold on a minute, what about this and what about that? We can do that now without having to reorganise our packaging. Yeah.
Thank you. Next question, which I'll add some commentary to, then I'll ask Graeme to come in as well. This is from Laura Griffiths. I'll be very interested to hear more on the advanced manufacturing and automation initiatives to support sustainability. What should companies be implementing, and where do we need more innovation? I think this is a good example of where innovation and sustainability are interdependent. And Rich mentioned earlier about the aspects that can be adopted towards sustainability. But I think this is an interesting area, particularly for UK manufacturing, of looking at onshoring. So there are opportunities where you can reduce carbon by onshoring products, but also looking at things like advanced manufacturing, things like automation, to make UK manufacturing more agile and more competitive. So I think that sustainability and innovation is potentially opening up new opportunities for all sorts of organisations. And I was going to ask you, Graeme, what Pennine Healthcare are doing towards retaining UK manufacturing in terms of automation, all the questions that Laura asked.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. It's a really good question. I mean, we were buying some products from China, and that was 5,656 miles away, we calculated, from that factory to our door. For us, the nearest NHS supply chain warehouse is 17 miles away. So for us, it doesn't make a lot of sense in terms of sustainability agenda why we're not manufacturing here sterilising here and then sending 17 miles up the road rather than sending around the world. It just, for us, it's crazy. There was I think it was Michelle might have shared me a slide deck a while ago with one of her partners, and I think they reckoned that they could actually find savings of 50% in terms of their cost savings by onshoring rather than manufacturing abroad, which is often the myth because of obviously the reduced costs abroad. But they actually found it to be very, very profitable. And I think, Michelle, that there was a 30% reduction in terms improvement, in their service levels as well.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. And absolutely, that's right. And it links into the automation piece, because one of the things that they did was invested in bespoke automated manufacturing in the UK and saved themselves a fortune, you know. And this goes back to that saying, which is that if you think environmental sustainability is going to cost you more, you're doing it wrong. It's just thinking about things in that holistic manner, and then
exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's exactly it. And I think we have to change that mindset. And I know I'm conscious of time, Richard, but we've just signed off last week an investment in new equipment, manufactured equipment for our Derby site. And that is a fully automated line that will produce and package products with limited interaction with humans, which is really, really helpful. Last night we were at the Make UK Awards as well. And what I would say is the agenda around UK manufacturing has swung so heavily in our favour in terms of what's happening with Brexit, what's happening with COVID, what happened with the Suez Canal, what's happening in the Red Sea, what's happening with global conflict. And I think we're in a really sweet spot right now to see that we will see that switch to UK manufacturing a lot more prominently. Both the current government and the potential future government are both really banging this drum, saying that this is a key focus for them. And the CEO of Make UK speaks on a bi-weekly basis to the Chancellor on this topic. So it's something that I think we're going to see more and more of, and it could be great for the net zero agenda as well.
Thank you. Before I hop on to the next question, Claire Brooks shared a really interesting link for those that want to know more about a global circularity report. So if you've not seen it, scroll back up, you'll be able to click the link and access that data. The next question is around waste, which I'll ask Rich. Matt Langford, interested to know about approaches to manage the relative challenges of waste reduction, particularly plastic, and reducing eCO2. Particularly when solutions for these problems are not always aligned. It feels like the focus is primarily on eCO2, but just wondering if there are scenarios in which waste reduction is prioritised, or if there are requirements from the NHS or others which require particular attention to waste above the eCO2. Thanks for that question, Matt. I'll ask Rich, and then if anybody else wants to come in afterward, that'd be great.
Yeah, so I think waste is really the number one. It's at the top of the list, right? Any cost savings, any efficiency savings, any carbon savings, it's the circular theory. You start off by looking at what we don't need and actually stripping out product, like things that we actually perhaps don't need to be producing. Could we be using these differently? And then within the product itself, like how I talked about lightweighting, reducing the number of components, reducing sub-assemblies, reducing the amount of packaging. If you kind of really take a step back and look at what is the contributing factors to the footprint of the product, there's a heck of a lot that you can actually strip out. Lots of products have been on the market for 5-10 plus years, and they're kind of not really or have ever really been through this kind of sustainability lens. And so now we're coming into an era where this is really critically important for a number of reasons. So it's really now is the time to start looking much more closely at that. And as we've heard, you can actually save cost and save carbon at the same time. But all I would say is quantifying your gains through the kind of the CO2 reductions is really important, because that will tie into your carbon reduction plan, your ESG. That's the kind of language that your customers want to hear. that's what will be really viewed favourably at procurement levels. So you kind of need to have that data to support what it is that you're doing, your waste initiatives.
Thank
There's
you.
also some sort of obvious things, right, to do with reducing waste. So you know, when you look at a procedure that's being done in an operating theatre, look at everything that appears on your, you know, in the operating theatre, and work out, are you using all of that? Because lots of it is historical stuff that isn't the case. And I'm sure Graeme would be working on some of this stuff with his kits. You know, is everybody using all of the stuff in the kits, or can we remove some of those things? And obviously that reduces waste and cost, and the same with goods going out of date, right? There's so many obvious things as well as the not obvious things.
Perfect. This might be the last question. It's all about culture. So as we know, managing change is an incredibly difficult science. So you can have lots of strategies in place, but if there's no energy to make the change, then there'll be no impact. So there's a question here from Janine Downs. Thank you for all the insightful information. Having the correct company culture works really well. We have our environmental representative who is working with the parent company to move our tenant suppliers to reduction of carbon. I just want to ask this question to Graeme in terms of Pennine, because a lot of this is about culture. If you do have the right culture within an organisation, you can manage change. So I'd be interested if you could share some insights, Graeme, in terms of what Pennine Healthcare is doing from the ground up and how people are embracing sustainability.
I think there was also a question, was Pete asked as well, about you know, in terms of our cultural journey around this topic, and I think we're actually quite far away from being where I want to be in terms of this mindset. I really think we are. And now what we did, we have a very tight set of focus areas for our business. One of them was commercial growth, linked to delivering to our customers, and the second one was our journey to net zero. So we made it extremely visible as a leadership team, and my head of operations, who's on our board, Richard, he is the one that's leading this program. So we tried to make a very senior person in our organisation the one that was also responsible for the majority of our colleagues in that operations function. We put Richard at the heart of what we do in terms of net zero. We made it one of our 2 core priorities. I know priority should be 1, but we've got 2. And we put this right at the heart of everything we do by ensuring that it was talked about at every team briefing. It's talked about at our quarterly team talks, our annual employee-owned conference. We talk about it. We make it the absolute focus for the organisation. We also do incentives as well. So we have stuff like called Surprise and Delight, which if we see good activities that you're undertaking, we'll reward colleagues. We also do another programme called Wins and Great Mistakes. So if we reward colleagues as well, if we're seeing them do good activities on net zero, so if we're seeing mistakes within the business as well around net zero, we also reward that as well, because we want people to be open and honest. So it's really doing lots and lots of things. As I said in my summary, it's not really a silver bullet for us. We're doing lots and lots of things. We're incentivizing, we're rewarding, we're putting net zero champions across the business. We've got a colleague council called We Matter, which is one colleague that's not a manager from every department, and that's chaired by our head of people. And that's one of their core topics, is how to look for projects where we can become more sustainable. So there's lots and lots of things we do around the business, Richard, rather than just like 1 or 2 things, but it takes time. And we've been on this journey probably 2 years, which is not long, because the previous CEO had a different view on it. But in our business at this moment in time, we're really trying to make it that core purpose and value of our business.
Thank you. Those Q&As went rapidly, so I'm now going to hand over to Dave. I'd love to carry on this conversation, but we're kind of conscious of people's time and getting on with their day. But thanks to the speakers, and over to you, Dave.
Thanks, Richard, and absolutely that could really go on because it's really interesting. Thanks for chairing a really good panel discussion of the Q8 and the Q&A there, Richard. And also three great talks. Thanks, Michelle, Rich and Graeme, for really interesting presentations this morning. And as mentioned earlier, PDM are going to share some information with all you delegates later on. The event has been recorded. And everybody have a great weekend when we get there. And all the best. Thank you.